I had just moved into the neighborhood, a quiet, suburban paradise, or so I thought. The houses were pristine, the lawns meticulously maintained, and there was a general sense of order. But as I soon learned, beneath that polished veneer lurked an iron-fisted rule imposed by the local HOA, spearheaded by none other than Karen, a woman who seemed to think she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. My mistake? Owning a car that, in her eyes, I didn't deserve. The car in question was my pride and joy, a sleek, fully restored 1969 Dodge Charger, painted in deep midnight blue with chrome trimmings that gleamed under the sun. It had been a passion project, something I had worked on for years, pouring time, effort, and a significant amount of money into getting it into perfect condition. I had always dreamed of owning a classic muscle car, and now that I finally had it, I intended to enjoy every moment of it. But Karen saw it differently. It started subtly. The first time I noticed her, she was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching as I pulled into my driveway. At first, I chalked it up to neighborhood curiosity. After all, I was a new guy on the block. But the way she stared at my car, lips pursed, eyes squinting, felt off. The next day, I caught her doing the same thing, and the day after that. Finally, one afternoon, as I was polishing the hood, she decided to make her move. "Hello, neighbor," she greeted, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. I straightened up and gave her a polite nod. "Hi there. Can I help you with something?" Her eyes flickered toward my car. "That's quite the vehicle you've got there. It doesn't really fit the neighborhood aesthetic, does it?" I frowned. "It's a classic." "Yes, but it's a bit much, don't you think?" She chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "I mean, a car like that belongs to someone who truly appreciates it." I arched an eyebrow. "I do appreciate it." She tilted her head, her gaze scrutinizing me as if she were assessing my worth. Then, with a casualness that made my jaw nearly drop, she said, "You know, my son's birthday is coming up. He's turning 18. He's always wanted a car like this. Maybe you consider handing it over to someone who deserves it." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Karen sighed, shaking her head as if I was the unreasonable one. "Listen, I know you're new here, but in this community, we believe in generosity. We help each other out. My son is a responsible young man, and this car would mean the world to him. You don't seem like someone who needs a car like this. Why not do the right thing?" I let out a short laugh, hoping this was some kind of bizarre joke. "Yeah, that's not happening." Her smile faltered, replaced by something sharper. "I see," she said, her voice cooler. "Well, that's disappointing. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another entitled neighbor trying to see if they could get their way. But then the rumor started. A few days later, I overheard two women whispering as I walked past. Doesn't even deserve that car. Honestly, so selfish. Just gave it away. I stopped in my tracks. Karen, she was spreading rumors. Things only got worse from there. The day after my bizarre encounter with Karen, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the whispering neighbors anymore. It was the looks. People would glance at me from their porches, shake their heads, and then turn away like I was some sort of pariah. It was as if I had done something unspeakable when, in reality, all I did was refuse to hand over my car. I tried to brush it off, but then the HOA letters started coming. At first, they were minor nuisances. The first letter was about my car being in violation of community aesthetic guidelines. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Nowhere in the HOA contract I had signed did it mention that vehicles had to conform to some kind of uniformity. The entire neighborhood was filled with SUVs, minivans, and the occasional sports car. My Dodge Charger, though classic, was in perfect condition, no rust, no dents, and always parked neatly in my driveway. I decided to ignore the letter. A week later, another one arrived. This time, it was a warning. I had been reported for noise disturbances. I blinked at the accusation, completely baffled. I worked from home, and rarely played music or hosted gatherings. My car's engine was loud, sure, but I only ever started it during reasonable hours. Still, I dismissed it as a clerical error and moved on. Then, the fines started coming. Each letter contained increasingly absurd complaints. One claimed that my lawn was not up to HOA standards, even though I had a professional landscaper come every 2 weeks. Another accused me of blocking the sidewalk with my vehicle, even though I never parked it anywhere but my own driveway. The worst one yet? A fine stating that my continued noncompliance meant I owed the HOA $500 for aesthetic violations. That's when I knew this wasn't some bureaucratic oversight. This was Karen. I decided to confront her. The next evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I spotted her watering the potted plants outside her pristine, white-fenced home. Taking a deep breath, I walked over. "Evening, Karen." She turned, feigning surprise. "Oh, hello, neighbor." I held up the latest fine notice. "Any idea why I keep getting these?" Her expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Well, if you're receiving citations, it must be because you're breaking the rules." I clenched my jaw. Rules that didn't exist before I moved in. She sighed dramatically. "You have to understand, we have standards in this neighborhood. Some of us have worked hard to maintain a certain atmosphere. Your car," she gestured toward my driveway, "is disruptive." I folded my arms. "Disruptive how?" Karen pursed her lips. "It's flashy. It attracts attention. It's not exactly the kind of vehicle that blends in with our quiet community. It gives off the wrong impression." I let out a humorless laugh. "And let me guess, the right impression would be me handing it over to your son." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I was trying to be reasonable. I shook my head. "You can keep trying, but I'm not getting rid of my car." Karen exhaled through her nose, clearly frustrated. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "That's funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." I turned on my heel and walked back to my house. I figured that would be the end of it. I had made my stance clear, but Karen wasn't done. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of someone outside. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of something scraping against metal. My stomach clenched as I bolted out of bed, grabbed my phone, and rushed to the front door. When I yanked it open, my heart pounded at what I saw. A shadowy figure stood beside my car, hand pressed against the hood. In their other hand, they clutched a key, my car key, hovering just inches from the driver's side door. I didn't think. I just reacted. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping forward. The figure jolted in surprise, and as the porch light illuminated them, I saw exactly who it was. One of the HOA board members. Not Karen, but a middle-aged man I had seen standing next to her at one of the community meetings. His eyes widened, and for a split second he hesitated. Then he turned on his heel and sprinted down the street. I didn't bother chasing him. I had already taken a picture. The next morning, I took my evidence straight to the HOA office. I demanded to speak to whoever was in charge, only be met with a sneering Karen behind the front desk. "Ah," she said smoothly, leaning forward. "Hear about another fine?" I slammed my phone down, the screen still displaying the picture of the man caught red-handed. "No, I'm here about this." Karen's smile faltered for the briefest of moments before she recovered. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." I crossed my arms. "That's your little HOA buddy trying to vandalize my car. You want to explain why one of your people was caught in my driveway with a key in hand?" She scoffed. "That proves nothing. Maybe he was just admiring it." I let out a cold laugh. "Yeah? Well, I wonder what the police will think when I show them the footage." Karen's eyes flickered with something close to panic, but she masked it quickly. "You're being dramatic." "No, Karen, you are. And you just got caught." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out, knowing full well this wasn't over. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. After my confrontation with Karen, I knew she wasn't going to back down. The look in her eyes had been a mix of fury and calculation, like she was already thinking of her next move. I had made one thing clear. I wasn't going to roll over. But if the past few weeks had taught me anything, it was that Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the retaliation escalated. The next day, I woke up to find another HOA violation notice taped to my door. This one claimed that my car was now considered an abandoned vehicle and would be subject to removal if I didn't comply within 48 hours. I laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of it. My car, the same one I parked in my driveway every single night, was now abandoned? It was clear Karen and her cronies were getting desperate. I decided it was time to hit back harder. Fighting back. I compiled everything I had, every letter, every fine, and most importantly, the photo of the HOA board member attempting to key my car. I made copies and emailed them to a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Within hours, I got a call back. "This is a textbook case of HOA harassment," the lawyer said. "They can't just invent rules to target you, and the vandalism attempt is criminal." He advised me to document everything and, if possible, get witness statements from neighbors. So, that's exactly what I did. I started talking to my neighbors, especially the ones who seemed hesitant when Karen was around. It didn't take long before I learned something interesting. Karen had been pulling stunts like this for years. One woman, Mrs. Henderson, was more than happy to spill the details. "She drove out the last family that lived in your house," she admitted in a hushed tone. "Made their lives miserable with fake HOA violations until they finally sold their home. And you know what? The very next day, Karen tried to get her son's friend to buy it at a reduced price. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about my car. Karen had a history of bullying people out of their homes, all so she could control who lived in the neighborhood. Armed with that knowledge, I went back to my lawyer. "That's enough for a serious case," he said. "But if you really want to take her down, we need more than just neighbor testimonies. We need to show that the HOA itself is compromised." That's when I got an idea. Exposing the HOA corruption. I started digging into the HOA's finances. It wasn't easy. Karen kept everything tightly controlled. But through some friendly neighbors, I got access to old meeting minutes and budgets. What I found made my blood run cold. There were thousands of dollars in unaccounted for expenses, mysterious charges listed as community beautification with no receipts or actual projects completed. Even more suspicious, a large portion of HOA funds had been funneled into a special discretionary account that only Karen had access to. I had hit gold. With my lawyer's help, I compiled a report and sent it to the state HOA regulatory board, the local news, and, for good measure, a few legal authorities. And then I waited. The collapse of Karen's empire. It didn't take long. Within a week, news broke that my HOA was under formal investigation for financial misconduct. Karen, in all her smug glory, suddenly found herself drowning in legal scrutiny. The state HOA board demanded a full audit, and when they dug deeper, they found exactly what I suspected. Karen had been embezzling funds for years. Her so-called beautification projects were just a front for her personal expenses. She had been using HOA funds to pay for her own home renovations, expensive vacations, and even her son's college tuition. And just like that, Karen's little kingdom crumbled. The HOA was forced to retract all fines they had issued under her rule, including every single violation she had sent my way. The police launched an official fraud investigation, and Karen's bank accounts were frozen pending the outcome. But the best part? Her own husband had no idea about any of this. When the news broke, he was livid. He had thought she was just a passionate community leader. Instead, she had been using HOA money to fund their lifestyle. Rumor had it that he filed for divorce soon after. Karen's last desperate move. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, Karen still refused to accept defeat. In a final act of pettiness, She filed a police report against me, claiming that I had stolen my own car. She must have thought that with her connections, she could make the accusation stick. But there was just one problem. I had every single piece of documentation proving I was the rightful owner. Title? Check. Insurance? Check. Purchase records? Check. When the police arrived at my door to question me, I simply handed over my paperwork. The officers glanced at it, exchanged a look, and then asked me a single question. Would you like to press charges for harassment and false reporting? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The final nail in the coffin. Karen was arrested that same evening. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs was glorious. Her screeching echoed down the street as she screamed about how she was just trying to protect the community and how I was a criminal who didn't belong here. But the best part? As she was shoved into the police car, her own son stood on the sidewalk, shaking his head. "Mom, you need help," he muttered before walking away. That was the last time I ever saw Karen. Aftermath. With Karen gone, the HOA underwent a massive restructuring. The remaining board members, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. And just like that, the ridiculous fines, the pointless rules, and the toxic control over the neighborhood vanished overnight. The neighbors who had once whispered about me, they started apologizing. Some admitted they had been too afraid of Karen's wrath to stand up to her. Others just looked relieved that the nightmare was over. As for me, I kept my car, and every morning, when I stepped outside to admire it, I couldn't help but smile because I had won.